Hello, beloveds. Welcome to the Amanda Collins podcast. It's my honor to help you awaken to joy, be your greatest self, and live a life you love. I'm Amanda Collins. Each week, I'll share tips, practices, and rituals to help you feel the storehouse of joy inside. I'll answer your questions and talk with thought leaders from around the world about health, wealth, love, conscious living, and parenting. Are you ready to live your most fulfilled life? Welcome to episode 57, The Garden Awakening with Mary Reynolds. During our time together, Mary and I talk about bringing the energy and atmosphere of wild places into your garden while incorporating sustainable living, especially growing your own food, all in harmony with nature's own intentions. This week's review comes from Amy Thornton. Amanda is such an amazing, angelic being. It's truly a joy to listen to her podcast. Her guests are interesting and I learn so much. Thank you, Amy, for this glowing testimonial. Mary Reynolds is a reformed Irish landscape designer, best-selling author of The Garden Awakening, and natural activist. Director Villian de Courcy made a movie, Dare to be Wild, about Mary's Chelsea gold medal winning adventures. Mary is a proud patron of Wildlife Rehabilitation Ireland and strives to do as much as she can to re-educate people how to live in harmony with nature in their own patch of land, to become guardians rather than gardeners. One day, Mary was sitting at her desk, looking out over the garden when she saw a fox and hedgehogs run past, and then the Ark was born. An Ark is a restored native ecosystem, a local, small, medium, or large rewilding project. It's a thriving patch of native plants and creatures that have been allowed and supported to re-establish in the earth's intelligence, successional process of natural restoration. Over time, this becomes a pantry and a habitat for our pollinators and wild creatures who are in desperate need of our support. Well, I just have to say I am so grateful to introduce Mary Reynolds. I love her book, and the synchronicities of us coming together is just amazing. I got a gift of her book for my birthday from a dear friend, Audia, and at the same day a girlfriend of mine in America had just been talking about how amazing her movie is, and actually I've been following her work for a couple of years here, and what I love is all the podcasts that I've done before. I'm recording, virtually online, but I'm coming here from Mary's kitchen. So Mary, so happy to have you here today.
You're so welcome. It's just wonderful. You only live up the road, really.
I know, because I emailed her. I was like, I'm in Ireland. I think I said I'm in Wexford. You're like, so am I. So here we are. So I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's great. Somebody to share a cup of tea.
I loved it when I sent you a little reminder. Yeah, you're like, the kettle's on. So what I'd love to start off with, first of all, I cannot recommend her book enough. I literally cried my way through the book because it just it touched me on such a soul heart level. So I would love for you maybe just to start off with sharing. I know your love of the land as you were born with that love of the land, but tell us how it's all unfolded into what you do now.
Okay, well, I suppose I'll start in the middle somewhere. So the middle, when I was a student, or when I was when I was learning this craft, there was no book that spoke to me in any way at all, and I suppose I wrote that book for everybody else, where this is a very practical and deep connection book with people. Are always talking about connecting with nature, and this is the book that basically step by step explains how to do that if you're lucky enough to have enough land of your own, any garden, any yard. So that's where that book came from. But where did it start? It started, I guess, I grew up in Wexford, where we are now, and not quite where we are now, but close to here on a little farm. And I was the youngest of 6 children, and my parents were farmers, but they also worked full time. So they were busy, and life was very different back then. We had a lot of freedom, and I used to wander around on the farm on my own, and there wasn't as many cars on the road. Everything was much safer as such. So I remember there was one particular time that kind of formed who I am, I guess, in a way. And I was somewhere between 5 and 7. And I know that because I remember looking down at my own legs walking through the grass, and they were nice and chubby. So I'm presuming the age. And I know it was May because the hawthorns were blooming. So I remember the smell. And I wandered up to the top of the farm into this really small field. And I remember distinctly when I walked into the field, it was just a meadow, surrounded by a thick, impenetrable hedge of trees and shrubs and natural things. And when I went in, I remember feeling there was something behind me. I looked behind, and the gap which I just walked through had completely closed. It was about 4 meters wide, enough to let a tractor through, and it was gone. There was an impenetrable hedge in its place, and I was very frightened. And I walked around the field for a long time, crying and shouting, and I couldn't find any way out of that field. Like, I was stuck. That was it. And after a while, I got distracted by the sunshine and the butterflies, and I sat down in the middle of the field and just, played, because I couldn't get out. I just stayed there. And after a while, I noticed that I was surrounded. And I looked up to see what was going on, and I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel lots of things. So suddenly I noticed it was the plants. The plants were all looking for my attention. And at the time I didn't understand why. And I didn't question it, because, you don't question these things when you're young. I just realized that they were all just as alive as me, and they had the same issues. Some of them were quiet and shy, and some of them were, pushy, and some of them were kind of cheeky, and they all had different personalities. They were all looking for my attention. And that was it. I noticed that. And that's the only thing I realized that day, was that all of these creatures were alive, right? In a way that I suppose we don't accept mostly these days. Anyway, eventually a neighbour heard me over the fence, or looked in over the not the fence, the ditch, and shouted at a daughter of a neighbour. And I looked back, and the gap was open, so I just went home. And I didn't tell my parents about it, because, you just don't tell them these things. But I did tell my dad about it when I was 18, and he said the same thing had happened to his grandfather in that field. It was known locally as a fairy field, and you go in and you don't get out again. It's like what happens, And actually I've found books since that talk about it. It's called The Stray Sod in Ireland. It's just an old fairy thing. But it was only when I started writing that book, The Garden Awakening, when I really had to look at that and think, what was that all about? And I eventually figured that those plants were part of my family, and I was part of their family. And they never had any attention or acknowledgement from me as their family. And it must have been very difficult to be ignored or treated as if they weren't real or alive. And it was one of the revelations I had, was that we if we treat things as if they're not alive or conscious, their energy retreats, and it disappears. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning and the basis of writing that book, is my recognition that we've stopped seeing the world as it really is, which is pure magic.
I love that. I love that. And it's about bringing that back alive. And I even just from feng shui, it's like you come into your home and you're like, oh, or you come into your home and you're like, thank you for the shelter you give me, and connect with it. It's going to flourish, just like with a child. We compliment them versus ignore them. So do you know, or do you feel that that the plants have feelings? It's like they know when they're to be cut, or the way, because I love about what you create is these wild gardens that allow people to connect with that magic. And now everything's trimmed perfectly, and it tried to be kept in a certain way, and really what it wants to be is wild, right?
Yeah, truthful. It wants to be truly who it is, and who and gardens have become the opposite of nature. They're ideas that we have of what beauty actually is, but beauty is truth. And there's no beauty for me in a garden which isn't truthfully itself. So I look at gardens the way a parent looks at a child, right? So the child is like a vulnerable being. Like, I have to start somewhere else. So the earth is like a heart, right? It's a big, big heart. And we used to live as the guardians of this heart. And then when organized religions kind of came into the world, we started to look at the land in terms of ownership instead of guardianship. And it didn't matter what we did anymore with the land, because it was all preparation for the next life. That was how those bonds broke. Before that, in all the native kind of cultures and pagan cultures, as they're called, that everybody lived, absolutely in service to the earth, because we had to in order to survive. We understood that. And that's where it all started to go wrong, when we stopped living like that. So when we started looking at it in terms of ownership, the heart shattered into millions of tiny pieces, basically. And those pieces keep breaking. But each of those pieces are like a little piece of broken heart that we can heal as individuals. And the more of us that heal each of those pieces, the more rapidly the whole thing will regenerate and start to become whole and healthy again. And so within that, I understood that each individual piece of the earth is like a unique being, and they tend to have they have boundaries, and sometimes they don't know their own boundaries, and you have to tell it what the boundaries are and which part you're working with and which part,
because it all wants it.
Yeah. And so I try and recognize that this piece of land which you've been attracted to, or has attracted you into it, it's exactly the same as you as a person. And so whatever issues you have, the land will have as well. And if you work on the land to help those issues, you'll automatically be giving attention to those issues in yourself. So this is all you need to do for your damage and your issues, is to give it attention. And that's when the healing comes in. And that's why all therapies work. It's about giving attention to particular issues, right? And we all have so many. There's a lot of work to do, But if you're living and working with your land, you can really, really work on that stuff. So the land, when you arrive, if it's like a garden and there's very little in it, it's like a cleared piece of land. It's like a vulnerable child, right? And it has no option but to look at you as its parent or its guardian to guide it, because it has no choice over what it becomes, because that seems to be we decide. So I don't want to tell it to be a pretty child in a pink tutu, and I don't want to tell it that it's going to get in trouble with the neighbours if it doesn't stay exactly as I have drawn it or dressed it. And that's what happens at the moment. People create these gardens which are, an idea of beauty in our heads, and they're very controlled, and they're quite dead, very devoid of life a lot of the time. Now, there might be a really nice atmosphere in the garden, but that's the love and attention of the gardener that you're feeling, as opposed to the land itself. The land just wants to be loved, like any child. It just wants to be loved so that it can be nurtured and grow. And what I understand is that you've got to step back and look at it as a child. So what does your child want to become? Like, who is this person? Like, well, who is this land? What does that land want to become? And that's the difference between what I do and what I'm teaching people to do, rather than looking at it as in what can it do for me. You know, we've got to stop treating the land as a resource and start to be in service as much as we can to nature and to ourselves as a result, you know.
Because it's giving to us every second from the oxygen that we breathe to what we walk upon, and I love that, creating, like, giving back to the land, you know. And it goes beyond gratitude, and I know that this is something of vital importance. And so what are first of all, how does one tune into the land? Like, and I am right there with you. I always say it's like a soul agreement. Like, you know, even the place that myself and my husband just got, it was just like, that was it. It called us, you know, this piece of land, and there's just this soul agreement, and you can feel us actually healing each other by being there. Like, I 100% resonate with everything you're saying. So then how does somebody go beyond, okay, I feel this attraction? Because, you know, you go to look at lots of homes or land and you're like, no. But you walk on one, you're like, this is it. You know, you're not sure why, but you may have your reasons, head reasons or heart reasons or soul reasons. But so then how do you tune into how the land is feeling? And do you also bring into the fact that if there has been any kind of trauma on the land, like if there was war or things that have happened there beforehand, does this all tell a story in some ways?
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a couple of questions there. So the trauma thing, land is just like a person in terms of, some people go through something traumatic and they hold on to it and they never recover until, you know, for a long time. Some people go through the same thing and it just washes off them like duck's back, or like water off a duck's back, as they say. So land is the same. So it depends. Sometimes you'll come to a place which is really holding on to stuff, like, so my land, right, which you haven't been to, but it has serious issues with abandonment and distrust. And, you know, it took me ages to realise, oh, okay.
You're like, show it up, here it is. It doesn't lie, there's truth.
Yeah. And it doesn't believe me that I'm coming to live there. It just doesn't believe me. And I've been planting trees, and I've planted a massive orchard, and I've been rewilding it, and I've been in so much, and I you know, it's starting to believe me, and now it really wants me to be there. It took ages, and I could see that it's a long process with that piece of land, but that's just who I am as well, you know. I think it would probably take me 10 years, you know, maybe to trust somebody in a relationship sense now, which is, you know, maybe if I do the work on the land, I'll be much better at that, you know, who knows?
That's amazing.
So, so, and then in terms of connecting with the land, so all connection is about connecting into your own inner self, right? You know this, right? So, it's about being brave enough to be quiet, and but I give people a process to do, which I suppose that's the easiest thing to explain. So I ask people to take their shoes off, because you know, there's huge interaction between the electrical energy of the earth and our own bodies and all that stuff. It's really important, and we're rubber-soled shoes most of the time, and, you know, we're disconnected, we're spaced out basically. So we need to really connect into a piece of land. You just need to take off your shoes. It's like touching, you know, the skin of a child. You need to touch its body, its skin, for it to really feel that connection, you know. So what I like to ask people to do is to walk the boundaries of the land, and ask to let the land know where its boundaries are and who you are, and where, you know, which part of it you're working with, so that it very solidly knows which bit it is. So you basically can do that in lots of ways. You can walk around banging stones together, holding the intention that you're letting the land know which bit it is you're working with, or you can sing, or you can you know, use water, you know, spray water as you go, or just drops of water.
Beautiful.
But just hold your intention, because your thoughts are really powerful, and your words are really powerful, and I need to remember that myself a lot of the time.
Me too.
But,
I love that though, just chanting around the land, and or drumming, or just singing to it, you know, just connecting to it, like connecting you would.
To it, yeah. So when you do that, then it's already alert, because it's hearing the interaction, and it's feeling the attention. Okay, so there's these wonderful experiments done by Dr. Emoto in
Yeah,
Japan.
I love his work.
So his work is about how water changes with different thoughts, and I kind of feel like water is the almost like the communication between you and the earth, you know. So if you're putting feelings and thoughts and intentions out there, those water molecules in the soil are changing and shifting the energy of the whole space, right? So, and doing that has a huge effect on you. Sorry, I ramble. But then...
No, I love it. It's beautiful because we are 70% made up of water, so there's
Exactly.
constant communication going on.
Yeah, yeah. And
so we walk the land.
You walk the land, yeah. And then so then what I ask people to do is to just stand, sort of, first of all, step outside the land and to just try and fill your body full of some really good memory, preferably from when you were a child, because they're the most powerful ones. And just to allow your body kind of fill up with the feeling of a good memory. If you don't have any good memories from when you're a child, then just find some. Like maybe it's just, you know, last night sitting by the fire and feeling safe and cozy, or whatever it is. Just it's like cleaning your palate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then you can step into the land, and you're going to ask to feel or tell the land that you want to hear what happened there, and you want to help it release it. And it's like the listening cure, right? So all you have to do is acknowledge and feel what happened there. Now, when you walk in and ask for that, you could be overwhelmed with an image, or you could have very, very sad feelings or very, very angry feelings. They're not yours, and you have to just let them go. But you have to acknowledge them and say, I'm really sorry that this happened here, and that we're going to move forward and create a different nurture. We're going to nurture you back into an evolved, strong, independent being, you know. But you might find nothing there, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the land doesn't have to be damaged. You know, it might be standing there, go, what is she up to? She'll work around, you know. It doesn't always have to work like that. Yeah. And so then I ask people to try, and if there's a tree there, then sit with your back against the tree, or stand with your back against the tree. And if you don't have a tree, that's okay. Just stand there. And this could be in a tiny suburban garden. All of them are relevant patches of the earth. You know, they're all relevant. So you just stand there, and you know, it's very scary for most people because they don't like connecting into their own hearts. It's because it's like looking into such depths that most people avoid them with alcohol, drugs, television, food. You know, nobody wants to do this. Nobody really wants, you know, unless you really do, you know. So in order to help the land, you have to be brave enough to connect into your own heart, right? Which is hard. So you connect into your heart. All you have to do is bring your energy in. That's it. Just bring your energy in. And it might feel unstable and you might feel distracted all the time, but that's okay. And then all you're asking is that you just kind of imagine light coming in through the top of your head and clearing. I guess this is just the way I do it. It doesn't mean anybody else has to do it this way, but the light comes in kind of, I don't know where it's coming from, the source star or whatever it is, and comes in and rushes down and cleans through your whole body and goes out through the base of your feet into the earth. You can ask the tree to help or support you, or you can ask, you know, whoever you believe in to support you. As long as you believe something is supporting you, it doesn't matter who it is, you know. And, you know, you should ask to be protected as well. Just surround yourself with light and protect you while you're doing this. Surround the land with light and protect the land forever. And then you just bring the energy right down through your feet, and you just imagine it growing like roots down out of your feet, right down into the core of the earth, which is the same as your heart, right? You're going right down into the core of the earth, right? And then those roots kind of become a two-way street, and the lava from the earth flows right back up through them into your body and warms up your body and fills you up, and then it goes back up through the top of your head to wherever that light came from. It's like a gift. So it's a circular thing. And that is a really good way to ground yourself and really connect into the piece of land and the bigger body beneath it, you know. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's beautiful. So to connect with the land, like, it just so resonates. And so, okay, so you have this beautiful space, or even, like, I suppose this can be done at a park or a local community garden. You can tune into the land anywhere that you are. But I know you're talking about a land that you've consciously chosen to be a guardian of.
But maybe you're a guardian of a local piece of land.
Yeah.
You know, you don't, because they all are unique and need people. You know, maybe there's a tribe for a certain part, or who knows, you know.
Yeah. Or just a tree that needs an extra bit of love.
Yeah,
or,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So then let's say you find sadness, you know, at a space. And so how do you work with that? How do you support clearing that or nurturing whatever's needed?
You just feel it. And feeling it acknowledges it. So you just feel it. And at a certain point, you know, you'll feel like, okay, kind of, I've felt this now. You just trust yourself. Like, because the way all this world works is it's all in the imagination, and you have to trust that those images or those feelings are right. And you just feel it, and then you just let it go, because it's not yours to hold on to, and it's not the earth's to hold on to either. You know, just let it go. You know, sometimes you can use fire to do that. You can just write down the feeling or describe it and just burn it off in the fire, and a piece of paper, just throw it into a fire or something like that, or just throw the thought into the fire. So that's how you deal with that. And then the next step is to kind of refill that energy with something bright. So you can bring in a crystal, or just plant something, you know, and just say, this is the new energy coming in here, and just keep talking to the land and telling it that we're, you know, this is it now. We're going to work on allowing you to become a strong, unique individual, and I'm going to try and work with you to help as much as possible. And so sometimes you'll get, so when I'm doing sort of, you know, I've come around to the understanding that we have to give as much, we've taken too much from nature, so we have to give as much of it back to the earth as possible. And I really love the Half Earth project by E.O. Wilson. So I'm jumped on board with that. I started a not-for-profit movement called We Are the Ark, and I'm asking people to give at least half their land back to nature, and to work with the other half, and absolutely have to grow our own food if we can. And if you have too much land, you can offer it to your friends to grow food, and that's really nice, because a lot of people don't have enough land to grow food. But I'm jumping now, but this is jumping ahead, and we will go back. But I was sitting at my desk upstairs here one day, looking down over the garden, and I'm renting here while I'm waiting to get onto my land. And I was looking down over the garden, and half of this has managed to leave completely wild. And I was looking out, and a fox ran across the garden in front of me, and just after him a couple of hares, which is really unusual. And then I kept watching, and then a family of hedgehogs a few minutes later scuttled along underneath the hedge. And I thought, it's like Noah's Ark. So I went outside to see what was happening, and I went down the end of the lane, and across the road there was a really beautiful thicket of a field, just impenetrable. It was full of gorse and hawthorns and skioks of all kinds, you know, brambles. And somebody had got planning permission to build a house at the top of the field, that box one that we saw across the way. And they had gone in and they cleared out the whole field within minutes with a digger, with no thought for all the creatures that lived there.
You feel that pain in your heart, right?
Right. And I stood there in horror, because I have done this myself so often, and I was horrified. And that's when I went home and started writing about the Ark, and how we need to create arks everywhere for wild creatures, rooted and unrooted, for all the creatures that have nowhere left to go. So what I'm asking people to do now is to give half their land back to nature, let it become a thick, impenetrable, messy thicket of wild plants, and then the other half you can work with to create beautiful spaces and grow food and make magic with the land. And that's
whatever wants to grow on it, like gorse and blackberries and
rewilding, which means understanding that nature's natural successive processes to heal herself are way beyond our understanding. So the only thing, we've done so much damage to the earth that there are plants now that are, I don't like the terminology, but people call them invasive plants. But it's our fault that they're here. But unless we take them out of our little patches, they won't allow anything else to survive, and an ecosystem can't re-establish. So I do ask people to, and it's brilliant because they don't move at 100 miles an hour, you know, and we have the opportunity in our small little patches to actually to actually restrict them and restrain them and tell them that they're overdoing. You can't come in here now, guys. You can have this corner if you behave yourselves, but you can't otherwise. You know?
So what are those?
Well, there's loads of different ones. So, I mean, Himalayan balm would be one here, and every country has different plants which are crazy, you know. Whereas over here they might be native, you know. But another one is Japanese knotweed, which is a very interesting one because it's not like the others. If I found with Japanese knotweed, if you try and restrict it, or not restrict it, if you attack it, it'll just explode. Whereas if, you know, I find, but this is, you know, if it's on a riverbank, it's different. You really have to work very hard to stop them exploding. And I don't think anybody really ever got on top of that one. But in small pieces of land that we have, if we're lucky to have them, you can. You know, you can actually. I know with Japanese knotweed, with me, it's just I tell it you're not going anywhere now, and it won't explode. It'll just stay there, and I've seen that so many times. But that, you know, with any of the other plants, I will take them out.
It's like a visitor in your home. You get the guest bedroom, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. But and it's a really good plant for medicine. But I wouldn't allow it to spread because it will take over and nothing else will survive.
Yeah,
and
so we need
that's
that balance.
Not fair. And because we've caused this imbalance, we have to step in and become guardians of the land, not gardeners anymore. We really have to change that. We have to remember that we have no role in this whole web of life, none, other than to be the caretaker. And even if that was never our role, and we've just, because every single living creature in this world, in this whole web, has a very important role to play. They're all connected, and the only one that isn't connected is us. So we're just tearing this web of life apart, and we're pulling all the threads out. And at some point, we're losing 200 species to extinction every single day right now. And if we keep pulling those threads, the whole web of life will collapse. And all of us who are aware of the situation we're in, we're all desperate, kind of going, how are we going? What can we do? What can we do? So this is something that everybody can do. They
grow their own veggies.
They can grow their own vegetables. No chemicals allowed anywhere near your house or garden. And allow half of it to become wild, to give homes and sanctuary to as many creatures as we can fit in there, because they've nowhere left to go. They can't go out into agricultural land because it's poisoned within an inch of its life, and there's no habitats left. So they're desperate, they've nowhere to go. So I'm saying, we have land, give them back as much of your land as you can. And this is a very simple concept. Just stick up a sign saying this is an ark. So your parents, or not your parents, your neighbours don't go, oh my God, this is so messy. You know, they'll go, oh, she's doing something really worthwhile. And I set up a website so that people understand that they can refer to it if anybody kind of goes, what's happening in there? Why is it all messy? What are you doing with the brambles? You know?
And share what that website is, and we'll put it in the show notes as well.
Okay, absolutely. It's wearetheark.org.
Okay,
very simple. But that's it. So and then then the rest of the garden you can create magic with, because the land becomes very much part of your family. And it's especially if you're allowing it to become what it wants to become. And by rewilding it, you're really allowing it to become what it wants to become, because it's just going to be a mess. You know, it's going to be a thorny, brambly thicket, while it's a nursery, which then creates lots of habitats, and lots of trees will want to come in there, you know. And it's very happy when you do that, because it's like you're accepting it for what it is. And the earth is the embodiment of the feminine energy, right? So we're always trying to force the feminine energy, which is, you know, the female, women and girls. We're trying to make them look like this weird plastic ideal, and the land is exactly the same. And we're trying to force it to be something it doesn't want to be. So when we go into what people consider to be a really beautiful garden, you can stand and look at it and go, oh my God, this is really beautiful, but it makes you feel uncomfortable because
it's too perfect.
It's
like
too
it's
perfect.
Whoever
and
we
that's
say
not
perfect
who we
is.
are. Yeah. And so you suddenly feel very,
you want to stand anywhere, you don't know where to go, you know.
Whereas if you go in a wild place, you just feel so happy because you're accepted for who you are in that. And the fact that people travel all over the world to wild places just to feel that energy. And yet in our gardens we create these really twisted versions of what is really natural, and then we go in and, you know, feel bad when we look in the mirror because we don't look like that weird twisted version of beauty that women are supposed to slot into. And
I suppose, like we were talking about before we started recording, is just like that to be free and to be wild, and, you know, even just singing and dancing in the forest and whatever, you know, that is. And so if we're treating the land like that, then how are we with ourselves? And we're not allowing that expression of ourselves, and we're restricting it just like we are the land. And then when all those emotions are suppressed, what happens to that wanting to feel free and wild to express ourselves, you know? And then that, I suppose, causes well, at the end of the day, probably things like disease,
blockages. Absolutely.
So when it comes to growing your own veggies, like, because I think that everybody's listening is like, okay, how can I make a difference? You know, I'll give some of that, you know, half the land, you know, to wild, but then to grow veggies, like, do you think that, like, there should be no flowers, everything should be edible? Because, you know, we were talking about this as well, how pretty much 50% of what we see is edible, even the ferns, like the top of the ferns, you know, to some the dock leaves, some of them, you gotta know your stuff. Okay, that's a whole different topic, foraging. Okay. Well, so then as far as growing stuff, like, what's your feeling on the tunnels, you know, or greenhouses, or just pots? Like, obviously in Ireland, like, we don't have as much heat. Like, is there certain ways that we can grow our own veggies that is more in harmony with the earth?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are, but one is forest gardening, which is something that would have been the way we would have lived, you know, before we disconnected from the earth. We would have had lived in a woodland culture where you would depend on the plants in a woodland culture, and you'd always have coppicing going on, which is cutting trees right back to the ground, some of them, and creating like multiple stems, and allowing more light into the woodland so more plants can survive. And so forest gardening is a really great way of allowing the land to become what it wants to become on some levels, which is a multi-tiered woodland system. But also we're the light holders, because we've removed all the predators from our web of life, or the large creatures who would have knocked down trees. But all the, like, you know, it's not that long ago when there would have been massive big creatures here, or, you know, that we would have naturally kept the woodlands grazed down, and because woodland, if it doesn't have the full ecosystem in place, become heavy dark growth forests with nothing growing underneath. And so we can't let that happen. We have to step in and provide ecosystem services, basically, because we've destroyed the web of life. So we have to hold the light. So we're the light holders now. We hold the light down into the tiers of plants. So, like, say if you have an orchard, and then underneath the orchard you might have, you know, berries, and then, you know, you might have perennial vegetables underneath that. So when you have a forest garden, you have different layers of light and plants, and that really creates a really diverse and ecological system of perennial foods. But that will only take that'll take you years to develop. It takes a long time. So you do have to continue, and I suppose on a short-term basis, once you're allowing the land to rewild itself, and it will become over time a woodland, you know, even if it only has one tree in there and it's all thick shrubby things that have, you know, that it will become that. So then if you can grow your food even in you know, a no-dig regenerative system, to really develop the ecology of the soil so that all the plants are really full of life as well, you know, because if the soil is dead, which most of it is, nothing can really be good in the food, you know. So I do think in temperate climates like ours, we definitely need glass houses or polytunnels as well, if we have the space for them, because we have to become resilient and get to the point where we're creating as much food as we need locally or within our own gardens, are supporting local organic regenerative farming. The rest is going to have to stop, because basically agriculture and industrial fishing is what's killing the planet. And the only way to stop that, and to force them to change is to step outside of that system and source your food from local walkable communities. And that's where the future lies, you know. And if we get there, which I absolutely believe we will, the future is a very, very happy, simple, much more deep and meaningful way to live. And we there is no choice but to go there. And there's a huge backlash against that, because people don't like the idea of letting go of all the choice that they have. But the less choice you have, the happier you are. You know, it's very simple, like graph.
Yeah, simplicity.
Yeah, and we have to stop flying, and we have to stop eating meat unless you can find local organic, organic farmers who produce food with less pain. And the whole way we're eating is how we're going to transform this planet. And that's the way it works. And it has to start at home. You know, we have to start at home. And this is something that people really can do to change the world, is to you have to stop flying if you can, and grow your own food and rewild as much of your land as possible. So what happens is, if everybody jumps on board the Ark, right, if as many people as possible, and we're just putting together a map now, and we're going to map all the Arks all over the world. And eventually, when they're all mapped out, we can start linking them up, you know, when things develop a bit more, and create corridors and things. But it only takes a certain amount of people to change before the whole consciousness shifts, you know. So all of the big changes that have ever happened in the world have started with the smallest of seeds, the smallest of movements. And so many people are jumping on board this Ark project because everybody wants to be part of it, because it's so simple and it actually gives them something they can do, which is really important. And what happens is, rather than looking at your land as this visual kind of, you know, it's like a visual kind of treat for our eyes, suddenly it's all heart-based. And you're looking at it and you're going, oh my God, look at all those creatures living out there. And like, they almost arrive overnight. It's like a homing signal. They kind of go, whew,
they can
here.
feel it. They can feel the heart is open. This is safe.
Yeah.
There's space for us here. We're not going to be disturbed.
It's unreal. You know? They just arrive overnight. And then, and you know, you're giving as many families as possible, you know, a home. And that includes things like the weeds, which, you know, everybody sees as negative, but they're vitally important. They're vitally important for healing the land. They're vitally important for food and habitat for the insects, who we've lost 75% of over the last 25 years. When they're gone, we're gone, you know, so we have to build them back up. And these tiny little pockets are, you know, they might seem insignificant to somebody, anyone, but they certainly are not. And there's a huge amount of studies to show that these tiny little pockets become incredible reseeding places for diversity, because you know, because there's so few places that they're safe. Like they will all move in together. It's like the 100-acre wood or something, you know. It's like they all move in together, and they develop a community that is balanced. And then when things change, because it's like the 100 monkey syndrome. When you know, a certain amount of monkeys need to learn how to use a tool before all the monkeys on all the islands learned how to use a tool. It's just this old study that was done, I think, in the Galapagos or somewhere. I can't remember exactly. But so if a certain amount of people shift their way of looking at land, it'll suddenly shift the consciousness, you know, in everywhere.
And kind of tip the weighing scale in a way. Yeah.
And then people will be going, what are you doing in the park? To their local councils. Why are you spraying? Stop spraying. Why are you mowing all this lawn? Let it go back, you know, just mow a path through it. Let it be wild, you know. It's just
so beautiful, and it is so simple, and it is something that we can all do, but it is just shifting our consciousness between, you know, like, this has to be perfectly groomed lawn to, like, and I mean, look how beautiful all the herbs are. Like, look how gorgeous rosemary and thyme and mint, and like, you don't even need flowers, just like mint, you know. Now, is that okay, something to let just go wild? Because I know mint takes on a life of its own.
Mint does take over. No, you'd have to be slapping its wrists and saying, get back in your box.
Is that one of those invasive ones? Well, we won't call them invasives, but it's very friendly and likes to be everywhere.
It's opportunistic for sure, yeah. Yeah, mint is one of those. I have some out in my garden patch there, and I have to keep giving it
talking to.
Talking to, seriously.
But it's amazing how receptive, because even, I just love this time of year, we just have Bielta and everything's open, the doors and the windows, and a lot of the bees and wasps are coming in, which we're so grateful for and honor, of course, so we don't want get stung. So like there was 2 bees last night right at the window, and I just said, can you please just go out, please, I'm going to open the window for you. And I just opened it and out they went. We don't have to be aggressive. It's just actually speaking and tuning into whether it's the insects or the land or
forgotten we can do that. That's all.
I know.
And people laugh at you when you do stuff like that. I find they do, but I don't mind, because there's a magic involved in connecting into these things that they've forgotten, and you have to at least put a flag in the ground and remind people that this is who we are, this is who we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to be dominating this, destroying. We live in Eden, we live in the most beautiful, magical, and it's magical and interactive in ways we just we're only starting to understand. We only see a certain amount of stuff. We don't see all the other creatures that surround us, So there's a huge amount to learn, but it all comes back to connecting in and being very simple and grounded, and kind of looking after the land, looking after your garden as a patch of the earth that you can heal. And then if enough of us do it, we'll just create a patchwork quilt of healed earth that wraps its way around the globe.
So beautiful. I love that. And I love that you were saying just to go barefoot in the land and hug the tree and just tune into it. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom, and just I can't recommend enough. I said as I was reading your book, I was crying the whole time, because it's just like remembering that, and I know that, but just to read it and understand on a deeper level, and just keep going deeper with it. So I'd love to ask you one last question. How could, because you are so in service in all that you do, how could all of our listeners, be of service to you? Well, the Ark maybe, or
if they go, if they can look at the Ark project and see whether if they could give some of their land back to nature, because we've taken too much. And if they put up a sign saying this is an ark, then everybody will learn from it, and more arks will be built. And if they don't have any yards or gardens or land, then to go to their local governments and say, why are all these patches of green here? Why can't we allow them to be arks? And you'd be amazed, even in those homeowner associations. I mean, they have a reputation as being extremely strict, but there's people waking up everywhere, and they'll be waking up in those places too, and they'll suddenly go, actually, we need to do this. And sometimes you just need a little bit of support to be brave enough to come out and go, let's just be wild,
And I think one more last thing is there a daily ritual that you do to tune into the land, or is it you just do you get out every day in nature, or is it just that connection there for you when you step out there, or is it something that you consciously cultivate?
I suppose it's more of it's like you do it's like, I suppose the land is my family, so you have to consciously check in with your kids, or you can't just not and expect the relationship to be strong. So it's just like any other being. You kind of go and say hello, and I do tend to sit outside with my bare feet a lot. And even the land here, even though I know we're only renting until we get to our own place, I'd have a lot of conversations with this place, and it's wonderful. Like, my landlord is lovely, but he's really when I got here, he was spraying, and I'm not exactly a calm person at the best of times.
Shy about it, saying it, I know. I'm like, I don't want to always be this crazy woman pulling over on the side of the road. What are you doing? It's like, oh gosh, I'm one of those.
But he was, with fair play to him. Now he still wants to keep the grass off the drive and everything. I understand that. So he uses vinegar now and salt, and he he doesn't ever, he's a beekeeper, and he's starting to understand how important it is and have no chemicals anywhere near, and he lets me let all this go wild. And you know, he still wants to keep his grass cut, but he's like, he's in his 70s and he's jumped a huge amount in the little while I've been here, you know. So, you know, sometimes people just have to remember, actually, this is much nicer. You know, it's much nicer to be somewhere that's just, you know, doing its own thing and being what it's supposed to be, rather than some kind of controlled, restricted version of what we think it should be. Yeah. And that shifts a huge amount. And we need to get to that place of embracing the earth in its wild, natural state, because otherwise we're going to have a very difficult path. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Your wisdom. Thanks for coming to my kitchen.
So happy to be here. Bye.
Want to learn about the ancient art of feng shui, or deepen your knowledge and continue your education? Join us at the Inner Circle of Feng Shui community. By becoming a member, you'll access my extensive library of webinars, videos, and tutorials on classical feng shui, space clearing, dowsing, and so much more. There are 2 live webinars per month, as well as meditations and rituals for the seasons. For more information, please go to www.innercircleoffengshui.com. And another thing, please feel free to reach out to me and tell me who else you'd like me to interview on this show. Now, Mary and I would love to hear from you. What are some practices that you have brought into your life, your garden, your home, to live more in harmony with Mother Earth? Please know that by you sharing your tips and resources might be just what others need to read to be inspired to do more. Thanks, beloveds, for joining us today. Please come over to themandacons.com to continue the conversation and get access to all my podcasts, blogs, and videos. Did you enjoy this podcast? If so, please subscribe to the Amanda Cons podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Feel free to pass this podcast on to your friends. That helps us get incredible guests to share their secrets for an inspired and joyful life. If you want more great resources, come over to amandacons.com and join my mailing list for all my latest content. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm sending